Today we're diving into the unnerving tale of the Harrison family and a seemingly innocent VHS tape from a bygone era. But don't be fooled by its retro charm. This tape holds a secret that's anything but nostalgic. VHS Terror. Chapter 1. The Garage Sale Discovery. In the heart of a suburban neighborhood, where rows of near-identical houses stood proudly with their manicured lawns, the Harrison family's station wagon rolled to a stop. It was a sunny Saturday morning in 1986, and garage sales dotted the streets like wildflowers. "Looks like the whole town is selling something today," remarked David Harrison, the father, as he adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses. He wore a light windbreaker over a faded Bruce Springsteen t-shirt, typical attire for a laid-back weekend. His wife, Linda, laughed softly, her curly hair bouncing as she turned to their two children in the back seat. "You two ready?" She wore a bright aerobics outfit, a popular trend of the era, and her neon leg warmers stood out vibrantly. 14-year-old Michael, absorbed in his Walkman, nodded without looking up. His sister, Sarah, 11, clutched a Cabbage Patch Kid doll, her eyes wide with excitement. The family stepped out onto the driveway of their destination, a house cluttered with relics of the past decade. Tables laden with objects from the 80s, Rubik's Cubes, cassette tapes, Star Wars action figures, promised a nostalgic treasure hunt. David wandered towards a box of old records, while Linda browsed through a rack of vintage clothes, her fingers brushing over denim jackets and sequined dresses. Michael, still with headphones around his neck, was drawn to a collection of comic books and Atari game cartridges. Sarah, meanwhile, made a beeline for a small table set apart from the rest. It was covered with a variety of electronic items, a bulky Sony camcorder, a stack of Betamax tapes, and an assortment of VHS tapes. Her eyes were drawn to one particular tape, unmarked and mysteriously enticing. "Mom, look!" she called out, holding the tape up. Linda walked over, a touch of intrigue in her eyes. "That's odd. No label." Michael joined them, his curiosity piqued. "Maybe it's a movie or something. We should get it." After haggling with the seller, a friendly older man who seemed eager to part with his wares, they added the tape to their modest pile of finds. Back home, the Harrisons gathered in the living room, the heart of their 80s sanctuary. The walls were adorned with framed posters of E.T. and Back to the Future. A bulky Zenith television, the pride of the household, sat in the corner next to a VCR. "Let's see what's on this mysterious tape," David said with a hint of theatrics, loading it into the VCR. The screen flickered to life, casting a glow across the room. The family huddled together on their floral-patterned couch, the anticipation tangible in the air. The tape began to play. At first, it showed a series of disjointed, seemingly random scenes: a deserted playground at dusk, an empty hallway in a school, a slow pan across a cluttered attic. The imagery was eerie, yet captivating in its mundanity. As the scenes unfolded, a sense of unease crept into the room. The footage, devoid of sound, seemed to hold a deeper, hidden meaning, like a puzzle waiting to be solved. The Harrisons watched, entranced and unsettled, unaware that this was just the beginning of a terrifying journey that would unearth their darkest fears and secrets. The tape, an unassuming relic of the 80s, was about to turn their world upside down. Chapter 2. Unsettling Nightfall. Later that evening, the Harrisons found themselves in a state of restlessness. Dinner was a quiet affair, with each member lost in thought about the strange tape. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across their cozy living room, adorned with wallpaper featuring geometric patterns so common in the 80s. David, unable to shake off the eerie feeling, suggested, "How about a family game night? We've got that new Trivial Pursuit edition." Linda nodded, her mind still replaying the silent images from the tape. "Sounds good. Michael, Sarah, you up for it?" Michael, his interest in the Nintendo Entertainment System momentarily forgotten, agreed. Sarah, who had been drawing neon doodles in her Lisa Frank notebook, closed it and joined the others. As they gathered around the coffee table, a Monopoly board already laid out from the previous night's game. They tried to immerse themselves in the normalcy of trivia questions and dice rolls. The game proceeded with half-hearted enthusiasm. Every so often, one of them would glance towards the television, as if expecting it to spring to life. Michael, who was wearing a Ghostbusters t-shirt, couldn't help but feel as though they were being watched. Around them, the room was a time capsule of the era. A slinky rested on the shelf, next to a row of VHS tapes with titles like The Breakfast Club and Ferris Bueller's Day Off. An Alf plush toy sat perched on the sofa, its furry form casting an odd shadow in the dim light. As the night deepened, strange occurrences began to unsettle the family. The lights flickered intermittently, and the distant sound of a telephone ringing emanated from the kitchen, though they found the phone silent upon checking. "Maybe we should call it a night," Linda suggested, a hint of anxiety in her voice. "It's been a long day." They agreed, each feeling the strain of the day's bizarre events. As they prepared for bed, the house seemed to creak and groan more than usual, as if echoing their unease. In their respective bedrooms adorned with posters of Madonna and Michael Jackson, the Harrisons found sleep elusive. Michael lay in bed, his thoughts drifting to the comic books he had bought, wondering if their stories held any resemblance to the odd tape. Sarah, clutching her Cabbage Patch Kid, stared at the glowing stars stuck to her ceiling, a popular decoration in children's rooms of the time. She thought she heard whispers coming from the living room, but buried her head under her Care Bears blanket, trying to convince herself it was just her imagination. David and Linda, in their room with a decor of floral bedspread and pastel curtains, whispered about the tape. "Maybe we should get rid of it," David murmured, his voice tinged with worry. Linda agreed, but a part of her was drawn to the mystery, a puzzle that begged to be solved. "Let's see if anything changes tomorrow. This could all just be a strange coincidence." As they drifted off to sleep, the house settled into silence. Outside, a gentle breeze stirred the leaves of the trees, casting dancing shadows across the lawns of the neighborhood, a quiet community unaware of the Harrisons' growing terror. Chapter 3. Echoes of the Past. The next morning dawned with a sense of foreboding in the Harrison household. The sun struggled to pierce through the heavy curtains, leaving the rooms dimly lit and somewhat somber. At the breakfast table, the family exchanged uneasy glances over bowls of Cap'n Crunch and glasses of Tang. "I didn't sleep well last night," Linda confessed, wrapping her hands around a mug adorned with the logo of Miami Vice, her favorite TV show. David, looking tired, nodded. "Me neither. Kept thinking about that tape." He wore a Pac-Man t-shirt, a remnant of his own teenage years in the early 80s. "Maybe we should watch it again," Michael suggested, his curiosity overcoming his unease. He absent-mindedly fiddled with a Rubik's Cube he'd left on the table. "Are you sure that's a good idea?" Linda asked, her brow furrowed in concern. Sarah, quietly sipping her orange juice, looked towards the living room where the tape lay atop the VCR, a sleek Panasonic model they had bought last Christmas. After breakfast, the family convened in the living room, the decision made to view the tape once more. The room was a capsule of the 80s, with a beanbag chair in the corner, a collection of National Geographic magazines on the coffee table, and a digital clock on the mantelpiece flashing in bright red numbers. David inserted the tape into the VCR, and they settled onto the couch, a plush model in a typical 80s floral pattern. The television screen flickered to life, casting a pale glow across the room. This time, the scenes on the tape were different. It was as if the tape had recorded their fears and was now playing them back. One scene showed a shadowy figure lurking outside a house eerily similar to their own. Another showed a classroom with desks arranged in a circle, empty except for a single doll, reminiscent of Sarah's Cabbage Patch Kid, sitting in the center. The family watched in silence, each feeling a growing sense of dread. It was like peering into a twisted mirror of their lives, reflecting back a distorted reality. As the tape continued, the scenes became more personal. One showed a recreation of David's office, papers strewn about as if in a fit of rage. Another depicted Linda's aerobics class, but with the other participants standing motionless, their eyes hollow. Michael's scene was the most disturbing. It showed his bedroom, with his posters of The Goonies and Indiana Jones, but in the middle of the room was an Atari game console, its joystick moving on its own. The final scene was of Sarah's room, her drawings on the walls shifting and changing, turning from innocent neon doodles into dark, twisted shapes. As the tape ended, the family sat in stunned silence, trying to process what they had just seen. The television screen now displayed only static, the crackling sound filling the room. "We need to find out where this tape came from," David said firmly, breaking the silence. "There has to be an explanation for this." Linda nodded, her face pale. "I'll start calling around. Maybe someone in the neighborhood knows something." Michael and Sarah exchanged worried looks. The tape had brought their fears to life, and now they couldn't shake off the feeling that those fears were closer than ever. Outside, a group of kids rode by on BMX bikes, their laughter a stark contrast to the tense atmosphere inside the Harrison home. It was a reminder of the normalcy that seemed to be slipping away from them, swallowed by the shadows of a haunting past that the tape had unearthed. Chapter 4. Unraveling Mysteries. The air in the Harrison household was thick with tension that morning. After the unnerving experience with the tape, each family member was lost in their own thoughts, trying to decipher the meaning behind the haunting images. The kitchen radio played softly, tunes from Madonna and Prince providing a stark contrast to the somber mood. Linda, dressed in a high-waisted denim skirt and a sweater with bold geometric patterns, dialed numbers on their rotary phone, hoping to glean information about the tape's origins. David, flipping through a Time magazine, occasionally glanced up at her with a worried expression. In the living room, Michael sat cross-legged on the shag carpet, surrounded by choose-your-own-adventure books, but his mind was elsewhere. Sarah, her once cherished Cabbage Patch Kid doll now lying forgotten, was doodling in her notebook, her drawings more subdued than usual. Mid-morning, Linda hung up the phone, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "I spoke with Mrs. Jacobson down the street. She remembers the previous owners of our house mentioning a collection of VHS tapes. Maybe they left this one behind." David perked up. "It's a start. I'll go talk to them." He grabbed his keys and headed out to his Chevrolet, the symbol of American automotive pride in the 80s. While David was gone, Linda decided to do some digging in the attic, a place they seldom ventured. The attic was a time capsule in itself, filled with relics from the previous occupants. Old furniture covered in sheets, boxes of books, and a dusty Commodore 64 computer. Amongst these items, Linda found a box labeled Home Videos. Her heart raced as she opened it, only to find mundane recordings, birthdays, holidays, a typical family's memories. No eerie, unmarked tapes in sight. Meanwhile, David returned with news. The Jacobsons said the people who lived here before us moved out in a hurry, something about a family tragedy, but they didn't know the details. The puzzle was slowly starting to piece together, but the full picture was still unclear. As evening approached, the Harrisons gathered in the living room. The tension from the morning slightly eased. "I think we should watch the tape again," Michael suggested bravely. "Maybe there's something we missed." With a collective sense of determination, they agreed. David inserted the tape once more into the VCR, its mechanical whirring a familiar yet foreboding sound. This time the scenes were different again. They showed locations around their neighborhood, the park where Sarah liked to play, the high school Michael attended, the diner where Linda met her friends for lunch. Each scene was empty, devoid of people, yet felt charged with an unseen presence. As the tape played, an idea began to form in Linda's mind. What if the tape is showing us places we need to go? Maybe the answers are there. David nodded, a sense of resolve in his eyes. Tomorrow we'll start looking. It's the only lead we have. That night, as they prepared for bed, a sense of cautious hope mingled with their anxiety. The mysteries of the tape were slowly unraveling, leading them deeper into an unknown they were determined to understand. Outside, the streets of their 80s suburban neighborhood lay quiet under the moonlight. Unseen, a shadow moved past the Harrisons' house, pausing momentarily at their window before disappearing into the night. Chapter 5. The Haunting Journey. The morning sun cast a warm glow over the Harrison home, but inside the atmosphere was charged with a mix of fear and determination. After a quick breakfast of Eggo waffles and Sunny D, the family prepared to follow the clues from the tape. David, wearing his favorite Miami Dolphins cap, mapped out a plan. We'll split up. Linda and Sarah can check out the diner and the park. Michael and I will head to the high school. Linda, clad in a pastel tracksuit, her hair pulled back with a scrunchie, nodded in agreement. Be careful. We don't know what we're dealing with. Michael, dressed in acid-wash jeans and a Def Leppard t-shirt, felt a surge of adventurous spirit, reminiscent of the heroes in his favorite video games. Sarah, holding her Garfield comic book for comfort, followed her mother out the door, a look of resolve on her young face. At the park, Linda and Sarah found it unusually deserted. The swings moved slightly in the breeze, creating an eerie creaking sound. They walked towards the spot shown in the tape, finding nothing but the remnants of a child's birthday party, deflated balloons and discarded streamers. Meanwhile, at the high school, David and Michael walked the empty hallways, the echoes of their footsteps a stark reminder of the building's current emptiness. They reached the classroom from the tape, only to find it ordinary, with desks neatly arranged and an untouched chalkboard. Frustrated but not deterred, they decided to visit the diner next. The diner, a staple of the neighborhood with its neon lights and retro jukebox, was also strangely quiet. A lone waitress wiped down the counter, her movements automatic and listless. As they sat in a booth, the same one from the tape, David and Michael pondered their next move. It's like we're missing a piece of the puzzle, David mused, playing with the salt shaker. Back at the park, Linda's attention was caught by a piece of paper partially buried under a bench. It was a flyer for a local community event, dated from the 80s. The names of the organizers matched those of the previous owners of their house. At the diner, Michael overheard the waitress muttering about strange occurrences in the neighborhood. Ever since the old Henderson house got new folks, weird things been happening, she said to herself. Reuniting at home, the Harrisons shared their findings. The connection to the previous homeowners and the neighborhood's unease seemed to confirm that the tape was central to these strange events. Later that evening, they gathered in the living room, the tape ready to be played again. The scenes now showed their earlier explorations. Linda and Sarah at the park, David and Michael at the high school and diner. It was as if the tape was watching them, recording their every move. A sudden realization hit Linda. What if the tape wants us to find something? What if we're meant to uncover what happened to the previous owners? The family sat in contemplative silence, the weight of their task dawning on them. They were no longer just spectators of the tape's horrors. They were now active participants in a haunting mystery that bridged the past and present. Outside, the neon lights of the neighborhood flickered in the dusk, a reminder of the ever-present influence of the 80s, a decade that now seemed to hold more secrets than they ever imagined. Chapter 6. Shadows of the Past. As dawn broke, casting a soft light on the Harrisons' suburban home, the family gathered around the kitchen table, now a makeshift command center littered with notes, maps, and a growing sense of urgency. The air was filled with the sound of talking heads playing softly on the radio, a contrast to the somber mood. We need to learn more about the Hendersons, David said, his voice firm, his eyes scanning an old neighborhood directory. He wore a Led Zeppelin band tee, a relic from his college days. Linda, her hair in a high ponytail, nodded in agreement. I'll visit the local library. They might have old newspapers or records. Michael, fiddling with his Swatch watch, chimed in. I'll go with you. They might have yearbooks or something. And I'll check the community center, Sarah added, her voice small but determined. She clutched her Smurf's lunchbox, a source of comfort in these unsettling times. Splitting up, they set out on their respective quests. The library, a building of brick and wood, seemed to hold the secrets of the town within its walls. Linda and Michael scoured through microfiche archives, their eyes squinting at the flickering screens. They found a series of articles about the Hendersons, a seemingly typical family of the 80s, involved in community events, school functions, and local charities. But one article stood out. A small, almost unnoticed piece about the sudden disappearance of Mr. Henderson. No follow-up articles, no resolution. At the community center, Sarah discovered a wall of photographs commemorating past events. Among them, she found pictures of the Hendersons, always smiling, always together. But in the background of one photo, she noticed a shadowy figure, barely visible yet unmistakably sinister. Reuniting at home, they shared their findings. The pieces of the puzzle were slowly coming together, but the full picture remained elusive. As they pondered their next move, the television spontaneously turned on, static filling the screen before switching to the familiar scenes of the tape. This time, it showed the interior of their house, focusing on the attic. Without a word, the family ascended to the attic, a sense of dread hanging over them. The attic, cluttered with memories of the past, seemed to hold a different energy now. They began searching through boxes and old furniture, dust particles dancing in the beams of light filtering through the small windows. In a forgotten corner, behind a stack of National Geographic magazines, they found an old chest. With bated breath, David opened it. Inside were personal belongings of the Hendersons, photographs, diaries, and a collection of odd trinkets. But at the bottom, they found something unexpected, a series of tapes, similar to the one they had, each labeled with a date and a name. The Harrisons looked at each other, realization dawning. The tapes were a chronicle, a record of something dark and unfathomable. They were about to delve deeper into the mystery, crossing a threshold from which there might be no return. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet, the stillness belying the turmoil within the Harrison home. The past was reaching out, its shadows stretching into the present, ensnaring the family in a web of secrets that had been buried for decades. Chapter 7. The Revelation. Under the dim glow of the attic's lone light bulb, the Harrison family sat encircled by the newly discovered tapes, a sense of trepidation in the air. The musty smell of old books and forgotten memories filled the space, adding to the eerie atmosphere. David, with a cautious hand, picked up the first tape, labeled June 1985, The Gathering. He inserted it into the portable VCR they had brought up from the living room, where a Knight Rider poster hung, now a reminder of simpler times. The family watched in silence as the tape played. It showed the Hendersons hosting a community event in their backyard, a typical 80s summer gathering with people wearing neon colors and big hairstyles. But as the camera panned across the crowd, it lingered on certain faces, each marked by a subtle but unmistakable look of fear. Each subsequent tape revealed more. October 1985. The Pact showed a late-night meeting in the same backyard, the mood now ominous, the attendees exchanging nervous glances as Mr. Henderson spoke in hushed tones. The last tape, December 1985, The Disappearance, was the most disturbing. It showed the interior of the house, focusing on a hidden room behind the attic wall, a room they had never noticed before. Inside, symbols were drawn on the floor, candles burnt to stubs, and in the center, a single empty chair. "We need to find that room," Linda said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. With a collective sense of dread and determination, they searched the attic walls, tapping and pushing until they found a panel that moved slightly. Behind it was the hidden room, untouched since the last recording. Inside, the air was cold, the atmosphere heavy with the remnants of the past. The symbols on the floor were still visible, a chilling reminder of the events that had transpired there. As they examined the room, Michael stumbled upon a diary, its pages yellowed with age. It belonged to Mrs. Henderson and detailed her growing concern over her husband's obsession with a group that called themselves the Seekers of Truth. The diary entries became increasingly frantic, culminating in a final entry that read, "I fear we have invited something into our home, something dark and uncontrollable." The revelation sent chills down their spines. The Hendersons had dabbled in something beyond their understanding, something that now seemed to be reaching out from the past. "We need to end this," David declared, a resolute look on his face. "Whatever the Hendersons started, we have to finish." As night fell, the Harrison family prepared themselves. Armed with the knowledge from the tapes and diary, they planned to confront whatever lingered in their home, a presence born from the actions of a family consumed by secrets and a forbidden pact made decades ago. Outside, the streets of the 80s suburban neighborhood were silent, the flickering streetlights casting long shadows. Inside the Harrison home, the past and present were about to collide, the echoes of a long-forgotten ritual resonating through the corridors of time. Chapter 8. The Confrontation. The night hung heavy over the Harrison household, a palpable sense of anticipation in the air. Armed with the knowledge uncovered from the Hendersons' tapes and diary, the family knew the time had come to face whatever darkness lingered in their home. David, taking charge, spoke in a steady voice. "We need to stick together, no matter what happens." He was dressed in his usual casual attire, a Star Trek t-shirt under his jacket, a symbol of his love for science fiction, now facing a real-life horror. Linda, her face set with determination, nodded in agreement. She had changed into comfortable jeans and a sweater, her hair tied back, ready for whatever lay ahead. Michael, gripping a flashlight, wore his Back to the Future cap backward, trying to muster the courage of his favorite movie heroes. Sarah, though scared, clutched a stuffed gizmo from Gremlins, a talisman of bravery in her young mind. Together, they entered the hidden room in the attic. The symbols on the floor seemed to throb in the dim light, casting eerie shadows on the walls. David carefully placed a cassette player in the center of the room, the diary's instructions clear. They needed to reverse the ritual the Hendersons had begun. Linda began reading aloud from the diary, her voice echoing in the cramped space. The words were strange, an incantation meant to close the door the Hendersons had unwittingly opened. As she read, the air grew colder, and a low hum filled the room, vibrating through their bones. The symbols on the floor started to glow faintly, a ghostly light that sent shivers down their spines. Michael and Sarah huddled close, their eyes wide with fear. The room seemed to spin, the walls blurring as if time and space were bending around them. Then, without warning, the humming stopped, and a deafening silence filled the room. The family looked around, their breaths coming out in visible puffs in the cold air. "It's over," David whispered, a mix of relief and disbelief in his voice. But before they could celebrate, a chilling laugh echoed through the room, a sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. The symbols flared brightly, casting the room in a sinister red light. From the shadows, a figure emerged, the shadowy presence they had seen in the tapes, its form shifting and twisting unnaturally. It was the entity the Hendersons had summoned, now confronting the Harrisons. "Leave this place," David shouted, his voice filled with a courage he didn't feel. The entity, a mere wisp of darkness, hovered before them, its form flickering like a bad television signal. Linda continued reciting from the diary, her words a beacon in the darkness. As she reached the final words of the incantation, a blinding light filled the room, engulfing the entity. With a final ear-piercing screech, it vanished, leaving behind a sense of peace that had long been absent from the house. The family, exhausted but unharmed, embraced each other, their bond strengthened by the ordeal they had endured together. They had faced the echoes of the past and emerged victorious. As dawn broke, the first light of morning shone through the small attic window, casting a new day over the Harrison home. The nightmare was over, the mystery of the tapes resolved. But the memories of that night would linger, a reminder of the thin veil between the ordinary and the extraordinary. Outside, the neighborhood slowly woke up, the events of the night unknown to the rest of the world. In the Harrison home, a new chapter began, one of healing and moving forward, with the 80s nostalgia now tinged with a deeper understanding of the unseen forces that can shape our lives.